Would people have had 500 jars, 1,000 jars in their root cellar to get through this winter and maybe next?
So let's jump right into it. We have apples to turn into applesauce, plums to turn into a jelly. It is our family favorite. We have these adorable little cucumbers to turn into fermented pickles in a big earthen crock. And we even are gonna take the scraps of the apples, so all those apple cores from our applesauce, and we're gonna turn them into vinegar. Today is an absolute marathon of canning, food preservation, the works, and we're gonna do it all out here in a one-room cabin on the Montana prairie with a wood-fired cook stove. If canning and food preservation wasn't hard enough, try doing it on a wood-burning cook stove. So this is gonna be an adventure. We've got nowhere to go, nowhere to be, just these jobs at hand. For 1,000 years, people have preserved foods for winter, whether that's pickling in earthen crocks, packing with salt, cooking it down with sugar, storing it in root cellars. This was everyday life for humanity, and our bodies have developed to live that way. But in 2 generations, we've decided we don't need to do that anymore. And I get it. We have freezers, we have industrial companies that flash freeze our vegetables. In January, we can get fresh green beans. I mean, why not take advantage of that, right? It's also human nature to go for the easiest, quickest model. But maybe, just maybe, we've lost something in forgetting all the knowledge of how to keep our food. And on top of that, it's not just how to keep your food, but food preservation actually changes what that food is. When a cucumber becomes a pickle, or a plum becomes a jelly, your food transforms into some other thing, right? And we're starting to find out that those preserved foods may be something that, despite what the modern world says, we can't live without. Oh, they're beautiful. Do we put them in a vase? All right, let's get a vase. I love it. Wonderful. Thank you. Put it on the table.
Okay.
All right, go play.
Bye, Mom.
All right, first up has to be the most unusual and native food to preserve, the choke cherry. It's gonna become a syrup today, a syrup for winter pancakes, but also a syrup to add to water or juice to sweeten it up for a special treat. We make a heck of a drink invented by Maggie and George called the Montana Sunset. That's where we take some sort of an orange juice, mango juice, and then we drizzle just a tablespoon of this choke cherry syrup over it. And it looks like a Montana sunset. Plus the kids get their dose of an antioxidant-packed drink.
That's good.
We may not grow mangoes here, but for a special treat, thanks to the modern world, we can get it. But there's an old saying that we should eat what grows around us. In other words, don't import blueberries to eat if you have a native berry growing right out your back door. That native berry for us is the choke cherry, and it has vitamins and antioxidants that we need in our particular environment. So we use it. The choke cherries go in whole with a little bit of water to cook down for at least a half an hour, just simmering away on the stove. But the pits, the seeds of each of those choke cherries, they are poisonous. Yep, they are full of cyanide. Now the cooking isn't going to release the cyanide, but when the time comes, we need a way to remove them. And that's where our muddler and metal sieve must come into play. You could do this next step with an old sheet, a towel. I've done it that way. You just need anything that's going to let the juice strain through, but keep all those pits back.
All right, I'm gonna take this.
You got it?
Yeah, I got it. And it stains everything, so I'm gonna walk this out.
My dad and the kids were big helps on this step, and the garden is going to benefit from the breakdown of all that pulp. Choke cherries are darn near half seed, so there's an unsettling amount of waste with them. I've always been curious how the Native Americans solved that problem, as they consumed a tremendous amount of choke cherries. It was a real staple food. So if anybody knows how they did it, let me know. Now this next step, this is what makes it shelf stable for winter. It's not the water bath canning, although we'll get to that. It's the sugar, and it's a lot, basically a 1-to-1 ratio of choke cherry juice to sugar. It just depends on how tart your berries are, but the sugar is a preservative. That's what allows this food to keep on a shelf all winter with no refrigeration, no freezing. Don't add enough sugar and your syrup will mold. Add too much and it'll be sickly sweet. But with the right amount of sugar added and a bit more time over the fire, that liquid is thickening into a syrup. If I keep going over the heat and evaporate more water, we'd get jelly. But we want syrup, so off comes the heavy copper saucepan, and into hot sterilized jars goes the deep purple syrup.
It's pretty hot. It is.
All right, for all that work, we've got 5 jars of choke cherry syrup. Just 5. That's pretty far from 500. I don't know the exact number of jars, tins, or barrels of food that a family out here on the range in the 1800s would have needed.
Hot.
But we'd better kick it up a notch. In the next week or 2 of canning, I want to get a serious haul of jars stored away for winter.
I'll tell you what, every time I can, I think to myself, this isn't gonna take that long. I can have this whole thing banged out, give me a couple of hours, and I have never been right. It is so much work. It's wonderful. It is wonderful. But I have tons of respect for the women out there who can regularly and do massive batches. It's often something you do with friends or family because there are a lot of jobs and the timing is really critical. Bugs. And then you throw into the mix a wood-burning stove and everything goes out the window. Trying to maintain temperatures, not to let the fire go out, don't let it get too hot, have enough room to rotate all the different things around. Yeah, it's a whole thing. And that's why a canning marathon is truly a marathon. About halfway through you think, yeah, that was fun, I think I'm good for the day. And then you realize you still have at least half of the work to go. It's all out ahead of you and you just have to keep plodding along. And that's where we're at right now.
So these choke cherries have yielded a syrup from the gods, but at a cost. Lots of waste, lots of pulp and seeds dumped out. But one fruit that we are going to waste almost none of is the apple. Apple trees were brought this way in the 1800s almost as soon as men started making the journey. This is a serious staple food even in our diets today. Now, yes, we're gonna make applesauce with it, but applesauce often leaves behind the whole core of the apple and sometimes the skins too. But not today. Today those cores are being put to a very important food source, vinegar. Vinegar was a huge deal back in history. It went into everything, from pickling to pie crusts. Heck, I'm even putting vinegar into our canning pot water to prevent limescale buildup. We think of this as something to buy. Pioneers out here in the late 1800s thought of vinegar as something to make. Into the large glass jar go the cores, along with clean water, a dash of existing apple cider vinegar mother, that came from last year's batch that I've kept all this time, a tablespoon or so of honey, and a covering of cloth. And I actually decided to toss in my other trick I learned of a little piece of paper dipped in alcohol, just for those first few days when mold can form on top of the fruit. And you know what? It worked! A weight on top would do the trick too, but I didn't have one to hand. So a breathable cloth on top, and within 3 days, I'm seeing bubbles forming and the mixture is beginning to smell sweet like vinegar. A week in, it tastes delicious. And as it ferments, it's gonna get us through all sorts of jobs through winter. I plan to make much more than this, soon as the cider apples are ripe.
Okay, you can see these apples have all sorts of imperfections. They're small. They're not your store-bought apple. These are the apples of 100 years ago, 150 years ago. The top of that apple tree was broken out. The limbs are falling. Today may be this apple tree's very last harvest. But we are gonna make the most of it. Now, some of you out there, I'm sure, know that there is a whole world of knowledge with apples. I just learned yesterday that there are specific cider apples that come in more toward October, after the freezes have happened and they really sweeten up. These are ready now, and it's September. So they're falling off the tree. So we've got to do something with them. We've been eating them fresh, which is awesome. But honestly, applesauce is maybe one of our favorite ways to eat apples. And we're gonna do this in a way that stores it all the way through winter. Because these apples are kind of small, it's gonna take a little bit more work, but we're not gonna get fiddly with this. We're basically gonna take the stem and the core out. And if there's any bits of really mushy gunk, that's gone too. Otherwise, everything's going in the big cast iron Dutch oven and it's gonna cook down.
Canning is a long, slow process, so you've got to multitask. We had choke cherries cooking down at the same time as the apples. But before long, everyone was hungry and lunch had to be whipped up. It was jelly and peanut butter on bread for some, but for myself, it was a much better treat. And wouldn't you know it? It was something canned, but not something sweet. Canning isn't just for fruits or vegetables. Lunch today is canned salmon, slightly smoked, given to us by generous friends who are avid anglers, hunters, the whole Montana way of life. I made some fresh focaccia bread with rosemary, and that's all it needs to go with it.
Okay, so those apples are cooking down really nicely. A lot of them are just turning to a pulp, a very pink, colorful pulp, I might add. You know, it's never gonna be perfectly smooth, but what I can do, I could take a big muddler or masher like this, and I could come through and really grind it all up and try to get it as evenly consistent as possible, and that is delicious. But my big Uncle Dan's spoon does the trick just great. And, you know, a rustic, little bit chunky applesauce, that's a texture I enjoy. I think the family's gonna enjoy it, and it's probably more realistic to what Mom and great-grandma made out in a one-room cabin like this. It wasn't gonna be your finely sieved, perfectly pureed applesauce. I can't believe that pink color. It reminds me of pink lady apples, but this apple tree's over 100 years old. Long gone would be anyone who knows the variety, anyone who knows the history. It's just one of the thousands of heirloom varieties of apples that are disappearing today. These jars of applesauce, they are never gonna be taken for granted. Every one of these is gonna be a treasure when we crack them open in the dead of winter. As you can see, applesauce is pretty thick stuff. So in order for all that heat to penetrate, I gotta do this right.
So it's into the water bath canner for 25 minutes for that heat to really get in there, kill any bacteria, and seal these jars for winter. The jars of choke cherry syrup are going in there with it, everything all at once. Then out of the pot, day one is done. And day 2, 3, and 4 begin. We don't have anywhere near what it's going to take to survive winter, but we're working on it.
All right, here it comes.
Now, it's debatable how much glass jar canning people were doing out here in the West in the 1880s. Had canning been invented by then? Yes. How common was it for your average poor homesteader? Probably not as common as we'd think. Glass and metal lids, these are expensive factory things. Earthen jars, pickling barrels, these were the old ways, and I bet the most likely ways to keep food. If you want to see a bit of true 1800s canning, we practice sealing jars with wax and alcohol tricks in this video that I'll link above and put at the end. But the next food we're jumping into are real fermented pickles. And I'll be honest, they're different. They're not what we're used to.
So we've got loads of cucumbers from the garden, all different sizes, all different varieties. We have dill, some spices, some vinegar, and some rainwater. And that combination is gonna allow us to preserve a huge glut of cucumbers, and not just preserve them as cucumbers, but turn them into something even better, which is a salty, sweet, spicy pickle. This is pickling or naturally fermenting foods. And if we do this right, they're going to be half cured in about 3 weeks, fully cured in 6 weeks. And you know, that's gonna get us well into the fall. And if we want them to hold even longer, at that point, we can can them the way we'd water bath can anything. And they're gonna hold all the way through into next winter if we want them to. This is definitely the sort of food preservation that is ancient. I mean, this goes way, way, way back, long past water bath canning. This is where your mind has to be looking forward to winter. You couldn't start thinking in November about your next meal. You had to be planning this right now. It is what a lot of people would call kind of the middle end of summer. You can't get complacent out here. All the knowledge that a homesteader out here had to have just to get their food ready for the next few months. And when that moment hit and your cucumbers were ripe, you had to go, 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 go. You couldn't sit around until you felt like canning or felt like pickling. You had to do it. So as long as the days are this time of year, just gotta put your head down and march forward, because otherwise, we're gonna run out of food.
So here's the old homesteader recipe, but we're cutting it down a little bit because we don't need that many pickles. So we layer the bottom of the crock with a heap of pickling spices, then fresh dill, and then pack the cucumbers in somewhat tightly.
So I have little, tiny, beautiful, sweet-smelling cucumbers, but I want these to go in last, because if you think about it, these are the smallest ones. So as that pickle soaks in, these are gonna be done the fastest. The really big cucumbers, those ones are gonna take the longest. So the big ones need to go in first, and the little ones need to go in last.
With all the big stuff in, we then pour rainwater or distilled water until everything is just barely covered, and we add in another ½ cup of vinegar, ⅓ cup of salt for our brine. And that's gonna see these off for the next 6 weeks. We just need to make sure everything's submerged. You could do this same process in a big jar too, but the crock has one distinct advantage.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, the brine is in, on go the heavy weights. People might have used a rock back in the day. They might have used, you wouldn't want something reactive, so not like a hunk of iron or something. That would be pretty bad, but probably a big flat rock. We're lucky because we have the best big old thick glass weights. On they go. At first, I had too many cucumbers in there and I couldn't get the weight to hold them all down. So it was important that I took 2 of the bigger ones out. When they get this big, they're just too awkward. And so it's more important that the cucumbers that I have in there be fully submerged, everything protected from mold, than it is to try to overdo it and pack more in and maybe lose the whole batch. So we lost 2, we can eat those fresh, no worries. But this is ready to go. Now it just is a matter of time and waiting and occasionally monitoring. Oh, but the final trick. This is important. Okay, I have my jar of water and I'm going to pour the water around the lip of that jar. So when you look at this, there is a lip all the way around. So when I pour the water in, it's not gonna go inside. It's not gonna go down inside the jar itself, but it is gonna create a water barrier. So air can bubble its way out, but bacteria cannot get down in. Okay, so hopefully this water lip method is going to be the key to my success, because I got banned from fermenting and pickling in our home kitchen because it does give off, you know, a bit of a pickling funky smell all the time. And when you're hungry, that's wonderful, but sometimes it's a little bit much. So by filling the lip, I think we've solved that problem, and it's a problem people from history figured out how to solve too. Thank you to the viewer who taught me this trick. I truly had never heard of it, but it makes a ton of sense and I think it's gonna work. I'll just have to keep checking and topping off that water if it gets low. I can do that.
So loyal channel watchers know that we don't live out here 24/7, but it's not a luxury getaway for us either. This old house was homesteaded by Robbie's great uncle Dan back in 1889, and for decades after he moved out, it was left to store grain and then eventually just rot away. It was down to the wire of getting burned down. The only thing that saved it was that the neighboring power lines ran overhead. So we took it upon ourselves to put blood, sweat, and tears into saving it, so that today we can teach our kids history, pioneer skills, and learn a ton ourselves by actually attempting to do the lost ways our ancestors once knew. And one final lost food for today's canning marathon, the wild plum jelly that nobody can buy anymore. You have to know how to make it.
And you know, back in the day, canning was not a one-day thing. It would have been day after day after day, and it would have been urgent. When a particular crop was ready, you had to go right then and there and preserve it. You couldn't hold it over for a couple weeks until you felt like canning. You had to strike when the iron was hot. And usually, that iron is hot on a 95-degree summer day when the last thing you want to think about is winter comfort food, right? you're not even hungry. You don't want to work. You have so many other jobs to attend to. Oh, I'm sure it took some poking and prodding to get yourself mentally ready for this sort of a marathon. We're gonna face that same thing today, but I promise you it's worth it because all of these different foods, these are the bones of winter meals for the next 6 months. It has to be done, and we're gonna be so happy once we've done it. Let's get to work.
Those plums have huge pits in the middle of them, so what we have to do is cook them down in a big cast iron pot with a little bit of water in it. The juice is released from the plums, and we take away all that pulp and seed and add some sugar to the juice. Remember, sugar is the preservative here. A lot of people never even bothered canning jars of jelly. To this day, people in England and Europe often just put the jars straight onto the shelf once they pour in the hot jelly. So for us, it's plum juice, sugar, and then some time cooking it down on the stove. This is where the art and wisdom of practice come in. The thickness has to be just right. Too thin and it's syrup, too thick and it's just rock candy. So into clean hot jars goes the jelly, and for extra care, we're putting them into a hot water bath.
Oh, holy smokes. Those canning jars are rumbling away on a simmer on the stove, and they just need to go for 10 minutes. Oh, but I'll tell you what, I am wore out. And here's the thing with canning. It doesn't stop as soon as those jars come out. Yes, they need to sit, they need to cool, but there's a mountain of dishes to do. I will spare you guys the joys of washing dishes for half an hour.
But wait until you see the result. Hours of work, yes, but we have over 100 jars when you count the applesauce, the choke cherry syrup, apple cider vinegar, and plum jelly, and that big crock that holds many equivalent jars of pickles. On top of this haul, a homesteader would have tins of coffee, bags of flour, baskets of pumpkins, barrels of cider, and more. Is it 500 jars worth? Yeah, probably. But they wouldn't all be glass jars with lids. They'd be just like today, a whole assortment of food preservation ways, all adding up to a winter's worth of food. This week was just the start. Some of these foods were brand new for immigrants who were coming out here not knowing what to expect.
And out here on a homestead, let's say back when this house was built, back in 1889, when these boards were fresh, there was promise in this new land. Something like choke cherry syrup, that was a somewhat new food out here. People were figuring out that they could make a really sweet, delicious treat out of that, and it would replace the foods they knew back home. Maybe you came from back east or overseas and you were used to maple syrup or the particular berries of your region, whether that's Sweden, Scotland, Germany, wherever you were from, even all the way when you consider the Chinese immigrants who came up the railroad. When people got out west here, all those delicious fruits they were used to, they just weren't here. So they had to come up with new stuff. And the choke cherry is one of the things people fell in love with. It may not be as good as a huckleberry. It may not compete with the raspberry, but for us in this windswept part of Montana, the choke cherry is king. And almost everybody loves to have choke cherry syrup on their waffles or pancakes. We'll get through our mountain of dishes, we'll get through the rest of our work, and we'll just savor the fact that today was our canning day. That's all it needed to be. Thank you for cooking with us in the cabin today. We hope you'll join us next weekend. Who knows what we'll get up to. But with fall on the way, I am feeling very inspired. This is cooking season. Everything's kicking off. So thanks for hanging out with us. See you next time.